So this slide, just where are we now? Making our writing visibly easy to read and concise. This is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid our readers tearing their hair out because they can't find what they're after. And often I don't know if you've ever received documents, I'm sure you have, where there's just a whole lot of text down the page. And we are naturally, as busy people, we naturally scan the page looking for keywords, looking for information that's going to be relevant to us. To start reading from the top and read all the way to the bottom takes a lot of conscious effort. So what we want to do is we want to make it quick and easy for our readers to find what they're looking for and understand and comprehend that quickly as well. So on page 14 of the handout, you'll see I've got some information there about chunking. So the first concept of chunking is one thing that I believe makes a really big difference to how we structure our writing to make it visibly easy to read. So we're going to look at chunking and headings. Chunking involves grouping similar content by using bullet points, numbering, tables, or graphs. So it's about breaking up your text. And when people look at a document, it looks attractive to the eye. They're not going to be overwhelmed or potentially put off reading it. They're going to look at it and go, oh, I can read that. I can find stuff. I can see what I need to do here. So if we have this next slide, and I know this is quite a busy slide text-wise, and I don't expect you to read all of the text here. Just notice where your eye goes. Does it go to the left-hand side or the right-hand side? And if it goes to the right-hand side, that's obviously the chunked side. So chunking is much more attractive to the eye. The left-hand side, some people might argue that's chunked. I would just say to you that putting a dot point in front of a paragraph does not break up your text, and it does not necessarily help the reader either. So when we're chunking, we need to make sure we are breaking up text appropriately so that the reader can follow it and understand why it has been presented in that way. So let's have a look at the information that's in your handout. But by chunking, our documents are visibly easy to read. They draw the eye or the attention of the reader to the parts that are most relevant. They also help us to summarize a document more readily and talk to the document. So if a client rings, they're asking about the document, we've got it in front of us. If we've chunked it well, we can find stuff really quickly and easily. It's less repetitive as well. So one of the things I would say to you about chunking is that you can chunk anywhere from 2 up to about 6 items. Now, I know I'm not talking about numbering, a detailed letter of advice. I do appreciate sometimes with more detailed documents and more lengthy documents, you do like to use your numbering, point 1, point 2, part C. So I realise you do use that for reference purposes. Those documents how you chunk in those documents is slightly different to what I'm talking about, emails and general letters. So with general letters and emails, you would probably try to avoid using numbers because in those sorts of documents, numbers can tend to indicate priorities or steps as opposed to just breaking up the text. So it's better to use just the general dot points unless you are referring to steps or priorities. And anywhere between 2 to 6 items can be grouped. So what you're often looking for in the terms of a text is, if you've got a lot of text, is look at where a sentence that perhaps you're making 2 or more points, where you've got lots of commas or semicolons breaking up the text. So it could be lists as well. So looking for those sorts of things in the text that can indicate to you, I could break that up by dot pointing it just to break up the text and draw the eye of the reader. It can also show you where you perhaps are being repetitive, as I mentioned. So let's have a look at this example. On the next slide here, you can see the chunking example. So a couple of things, even to the eye, this doesn't look really easy to read, does it? So again, some people might argue, well, this is chunked. Again, putting a dot point in front of a paragraph does not necessarily improve the readability of it. So we look at a couple of things here. Firstly, context. Chunking needs context. You need to have some sort of lead-in context to explain to the reader why you've chunked that information. So in this instance, communication to be sent to phase 1 participant leaders, that seems fine, but to the second point doesn't really make sense. Communication to be sent to if permission to participate in phase 1 has been provided. So it's a little bit more complex. It's not easy to read, not easy to follow. So what I've done, you'll see here on the next slide, is broken out. This is one way you could rewrite that. So the communication process will be, and then the 3 dot points with some sub-chunking in there as well. This potentially could have been numbered because we're talking about a process. So it could be step 1, step 2, step 3. I kept it as dot points for the simplicity here. Always good to look at your style guides around what your rules are around capitalizations, punctuation, what have you, with dot points. But the general rule of thumb is if a dot point is a complete sentence, you should treat it as a complete sentence. If it's one word or a few words in a list that you've broken up with dot points, then you don't need to capitalize unless, of course, it's a proper noun. So usually full stop and a capital if it's a complete sentence. If it's not, if it's you're breaking up a lengthy sentence and you for example here the sub-chunking, you would use lowercase and a comma. So that's the chunking example, or one way you could chunk. Here's another one, very simple one. So where you've got a list, so you could break that up, and if we look at the next slide, you can see just that's a different way of writing it, so a little bit clearer, easier, quicker to read. And it does have an impact on the Flesch-Kincaid grade level. It went down 5 points, again by chunking and making it simpler, more concise.